So I was always thinking about, how people go to watch the sunset and how I've been in that position. What happens when we cut out the sun and that desire too? And it happened to be at the height of the glory hole, and it worked out really well because it's still a little bit ambiguous, but some people will pick it up right away. I'll probably go when there's a big swell that comes through and just go in the middle of the night and drill into the center block on the first point wall. I don't know, I kind of want to write like locals only on it, on both sides. I grew up in Long Island, the North Fork, in the water constantly. I was lifeguarding, I was boogie boarding. I wanted to be a professional skimboarder. So I was watching all these guys from like Laguna Beach, and all my friends were surfing, and I was like, fuck that, I'm gonna skimboard, I thought it was way more badass. And eventually I bought my own board and then just started surfing more. But that was when I was really, really not understanding my own sexual identity. It was always there, but it wasn't something that I was fully looking at head on. I knew I was gay, but I still was like, maybe this is just a phase, When I got to Savannah, Georgia, that's when it was way more challenging because my friends surfing there were all coming from conservative Christian values. And I was dating a guy who was way older than me for 6 years. And so they never knew. And I always felt strange just hanging out with them one-on-one because I had this big secret. And you never know if that could have just been me and my own fears, or if actually I trusted my intuition and gut and was like, yeah, it's probably not a good idea because it'll change everything. And eventually I started being more open, and it did kind of change things too, I was always like never really a part of that group. So that was kind of strange and hard. I did these paintings of Beach Boy songs. They're all lyrics. And I changed the pronouns so they're singing about boys instead of girls. And I did a series of those. And that was the first investigation of surf culture, surf identity, and me working with other mediums. So once I got a reaction from that, I started working with sex wax as material, and I started making the male physique that were based on 17th century famous erotic sculptures. I didn't start making work based on surfing because I wanted my audience to be surfers. I knew my audience wasn't going to be surfers in the first place just because I knew I would get the reactions I'm getting now. My work is heavily conceptual. I'm literally going in and cutting out little sections of a surf magazine image that was not the immediate or original focal point. It's much different, and I'm just using that image and blowing it up and creating a narrative that I relate to. And it's crazy how it's blowing people's minds, I'm a very small part of the LGBTQ plus spectrum, so I want to see more people coming out, because it's like, I don't really know anything too much besides what I've read about what it was like to be a gay female surfer, in the world tours and stuff, and how traumatic that was.
My dad, when he was out in the water, it was a lot easier because I would just follow him around like a little duckling. So he would kind of make it easier for me. But there were times actually that he ended up having to almost get into fights with other men who would shoot their boards out at me if I got a wave and they wanted it. The toxic masculinity, the I'm entitled to this wave and because you're a woman, you're not, consistently happened when I was growing up. I would say that the worst place for the toxic masculinity was in the surf industry. You walk in the door and what the team managers are asking of you in order to maintain your sponsorships. And it was manifested on the circuit and through other surfers, but it was worse in the industry itself, which needed to make money off of the fact that pro surfing women needed to be feminine to offset the more feminine aspect of a male surfer. The male surfer is not a football player, and therefore their masculinity needs to be further asserted by how the femininity in the female surfer is mirrored, and we had to play that role. Some of the comments that the judges had made directly to us on what we needed to do in order to ensure that we could actually start to move up the ranks were clearly pointing to the fact that it was something that was larger, more systemic. Smiling more, our hair was actually getting in the way of our performance, and we needed to make sure that we were adjusting our hair and making sure that we weren't hanging out with women who had been identified as lesbians on tour. In fact, I was asked by a fellow pro surfer from here at home, a male, who I was hanging out with on tour, and when I gave the list of people, he nodded and said, "Good. Those are the good ones to hang out with." Because my family was a surfing family, I was told that the thing that was wrong with women surfing were lesbians. So the very reason that women weren't able to get ahead was because of women who love other women. And so already internally through my family, I distanced myself from that feeling a lot, which led to internal fragmentation that was a pretty serious mental issue for me when I was growing up. I was able to get to a point where I was 100% committed to ensuring that I would do my best so that other young surfers, women and men alike, would not have to go through the type of pain that I went through. I think out in the lineup was really important. I think it opened the door to some conversations that we needed to start having. I'm really thankful for the movie, but I don't think that it completed the task of really reaching out and changing minds. It was just meant to highlight and to initiate the conversation. So it didn't go far enough, but I don't know that any one film with such a complex and systemic issue could.
My mother bought a house on Ocean Park in Euclid, and I ended up living across the street from Jay Adams and Tony Alva from when I was 7 till about 12, and they were like teenagers and would like throw bowling balls down our hill and hit cars and all kinds of crazy stuff, but also skate like madmen. And I had a pretty crappy board when I was starting out, and Jay gave me my first Z-Flex when I was about 9. So yeah, growing up in Santa Monica with that kind of Dogtown iconology, which wasn't even iconology then, it was just a bunch of wild dudes who loved skating and surfing. You know, you had a lot of kids like me, latchkey kids. You know, my mother worked all day. My parents were separated. My sister was off doing her thing. So we were like packs of skateboard kids, getting on buses, being 13, 14, going to different parts of LA just to go skating, or getting down to the beach with a board, and they would still let you bring a board on the bus. I loved all that. And obviously this is before I was even aware of my sexuality. I mean, that kind of came into the forefront in my teen years. I had a boyfriend when I was 17. That was when I had to come out, and then I lost a lot of friends, obviously. And even leading up to that, a lot of people knew because I was just so feminine. You know, like it was the 80s, you guys, of course. So that took me out of surfing and out of skating for a while in my teen years. When you're disconnected from that, you're disconnected from yourself. Surfers know it's like the most uncommon secret. What makes you happy is doing what you love doing. At the time, if you typed in gay surfers, you would just get cheesy porn, you know? But I found this site where other gay surfers were like meeting up to go surf, and it was all over the world, Australia, LA, Montauk, all over. And so I joined the site, met the guy who runs it, Thomas. He was like, I want to develop a documentary. I was like, I'll do it. I'll do all the music. And I got some incredible music. Thank you, Salema Masekela. And got incredible reviews, won a lot of awards. After Out in the Lineup, I got some shit from people, like some shady comments out at Malibu or County or here at home in Venice. But you know what? When you speak up, you make yourself a target. It hurt a lot. It was really upsetting because you just want to be accepted by your community of surfers. These two here, you know, Jake and Robbie, I met because we all surf and we're gay and we've started our own little tribe.
Growing up in middle school and high school, whenever I'd see a gay person portrayed in TV or film, they'd always be the stereotypical, like really, really feminine, over-the-top guy who's usually the best friend of the female protagonist, which there's nothing wrong with being super feminine at all. I just didn't personally identify with that. So it was tough for me to come to terms with my sexuality. And I think seeing other successful people be out and be themselves would have really helped me back then. And I'm glad that now there's sort of more diversity within that community.
I always loved the culture, and I grew up in Puerto Rico. My uncle and I would always go surfing. My friends and I would go surfing. I never came out until I ended college because I never felt comfortable enough in my own skin to feel like this is where I belong. I feel comfortable in surfing, or I feel comfortable in my environment. And I feel like having representation of minorities or queer people would be huge for someone who's young and watching and being like, oh, there's people like me who surf. It's great what we have, but it's always like there's so much room for improvement and so much room for diversity and inclusion.
I was looking for names in surf culture and queer culture that crossed over. I found this term called bennies, and the term is anyone who isn't a local. So just reclaiming the word as queers and people of color. And that was the main thing that I was missing when I was growing up and wanting to surf. I didn't have people who looked like me that I felt comfortable in the water with. That's the whole idea. I just want people to surf with, for us to have a community to feel safe, just do what we love.
our surf lives are super separate from our like land lives.
Oh, totally.
And like, you just keep your mouth shut. I wouldn't even like talk to people in the water. Like I was like super like head down all the time because I just didn't feel comfortable. Like there wasn't anyone around giving off even friendly vibes, let alone like queer vibes, you know? It's like, that's so sad. And like, I just wanted to open space in the lineup to be like, here's at least 4 people who are being friendly, being queer, being themselves.
I was always pretty neutral as a person when I was young, figuring out like, oh, I am attracted to girls, and it was sort of difficult for me just because of my family and my upbringing was always very like straight edge, very conservative, very Christian, you know, and in my house it was wrong, but in the surfing community it seemed to really to be fine, you know. A lot of my favorite surfers when I was a grom, they were like couples, you know, and these women, and they all took me in, like, because they saw that I was surfing and all I wanted to do was surf, and they all brought me in, like, all right, let's do this. Like, they would take me to Mexico, they'd take me down up to Malibu and stuff, you know. I had people like Cassie Metter who were like introducing me to people who were like, oh, you should meet this person, you should meet that person, you know. So in my Roxy years when I was writing for Roxy and, you know, playing that sort of role, I didn't feel like I fit in as like a Roxy girl, because that's like the last company that I would ever expect to pick me up as a team rider, you know, because I've always been a tomboy, I've always been sort of rough around the edges, and for a company like Roxy to pick me up and see some kind of value in whatever my image was and to pay me to go surfing was rad. But there was always something in there that was like, oh, like the spring line was all like pink and purple and turquoise. I was like, dude, this shit is so ugly. And I felt uncomfortable often, like wearing the stuff they wanted me to wear, being in bathing suits for a camera. It was like this weird thing, you know? I grew up in a skateboard store, and I feel like the skateboarding community is way more welcoming than the surfing community. And maybe it's just that they're more open as humans, and I don't really know, but I feel like the skate community has a little more openness than surfing. When I met my friend Vanessa Torres and Amy Carone and all these other skateboarders who were just totally open, totally fine with who they were, I feel like that's where I just stopped thinking about it altogether. It was because I had that like crew of girls who were just doing their thing and they were who they were, and we're just doing what we love to do, like surf and skateboard, you know?
I skated first, and I was in the first X Games that they had women skating in. After that, I started surfing way more, and I've always had like the same kind of group of friends. It's like I met Jen Smith when I was 16 because she like knew Vanessa or knew someone, and we all skated together. It is way more accepted in the skate community. But yeah, surfing is definitely a totally different animal as far as like the target market, because you have to have a lot of money to surf. You have to have at least a car and enough money to buy a decent surfboard and get to the beach.
Surfing has kind of annoyed me over the years because it feels like skating is being way more inclusive. It was hard for me to come out, and like there's still people I haven't formally come out to because I don't want to make this big announcement. It's just like, all right, I'm just not gonna hide it anymore, and they'll find out. Seeing people like Cori Schumacher or Keala Kennelly, even like in like a reduced capacity, like it was still helpful for me.
I think the worst possible thing for a guy to be called in the water was a pussy or a little bitch, right? And if that's the worst thing that they could be called, and they're constantly being thrust into a position where they have to prove their masculinity, at some point they're going to be proving their masculinity in a woman's direction. For us, it was being called a dyke.
Some guy was like in my face just going, oh, what are you, carpet muncher, what are you, gay, this and that, and I was just like, why are you even saying this to me?
And dudes being, oh, he surfs like a fag, you know, like shit like that. And I'm like, I am fag. Like,
I never had like problem besides some kook calling me a dyke or something, and I'm like, all right, cool.
Every now and again, I still get called faggot by various unfriendly people in the water.
When I was younger in middle school and I like started acting a little bit feminine with the girls and I would get called gay, those are like mental cues that I would hold and be like, okay, I need to act more straight, more like a man, because if I don't, people are gonna start assuming things about me that I don't even know about myself.
The hypermasculinity and the misogyny and the sexism is tied to the deep deep sense of insecurity of the male surfer. And so the reason that you don't have somebody other than Matt Branson come out as a male gay surfer is because that is where surfing's core insecurity is, the hyper-feminized or the feminized male surfer.
A lot of these surfers might be hiding or just keeping it low key, and they don't want to be the poster child for being a gay surfer, you know? That's a big deal and it's traumatic.
I would never want to pressure anyone to come out before they're ready, but I know there's a ton of kids right now struggling with their sexuality who, if they saw someone on the world tour out, would be huge. And it's really great that Tyler Wright is now 100% out.
No surf companies really do that. Their images are very like girls in bikinis, and it's very like a heterosexual sort of image as far as like brands go. But I feel like there's definitely a space for a brand to come in and just be that sort of all-inclusive surf company.
I think there's amazingly talented people within these brands, but unfortunately the up top is rotten, and that's kind of where it starts, you know? The fish rots from the head, and I think that's probably the perfect way to describe the surf industry right now, you know? I don't know if it's because they're so stuck in the bubble that they exist in, which is Orange County, and being gay or bisexual or lesbian, it's probably frowned upon there, and it's a bit more stuck in the past. So if you exist in that circle and that's the only place you're looking, that's all you're gonna see, right? And that's what I think the industry is lacking, is perspective, and they're so afraid to do anything different or be challenged. The young innovative brands are incredibly creative, and these big guys need to step aside so they can come up and be actually the voice of surfing. But I think for the big brands, the only way they're going to do it is if their back's put against the wall. And you don't just get to go and like, oh, we're doing a gay pride t-shirt, you know, for Gay Pride Week. No, like that's bullshit. Don't go and say we're going to get this LGBTQ representative or person to come on, but then like they need to do the shoot their way. Like give it to them and let them be the voice of that and do it completely their way and have a bit of shock, because that's a true representation. Don't try guide what that representation looks like of that community. I think a couple of years more they'll embrace it, but it needs to happen now because otherwise they're going to be irrelevant.
So for another person to say, oh, if you tell other people's stories, then like what am I going to get from it? It's like I've gotten a ton from living in a world that's not catering to me. It's that simple. I think you're not looking at it, and I think you're just coming up with reasons for why you need to marginalize and push people down. It's not a zero-sum game, and it's not about pushing other people down. It's about uplifting others. It's about all of us rising to the top. It doesn't have to be a rat race. We could all succeed, and I firmly believe that.
I want there to be queer people, people of color in the lineup anytime there's surf. That would be like the dream, to really change the way the lineups feel.
Surfers really need to care about the environment. If they're not, they should just go home and fucking not surf, period. They should care about social issues because it does affect the environment. But you've got to support gay folks. You've got to support BLM. You've got to, because all of this is going to create a better environment moving forward of empathy and caring about our planet, so we do have waves to ride that aren't full of shit.
Being a surfer in the political space is going to communicate a set of values that I determine.
Hatred just comes from ignorance, right? So if you could just educate people better, a lot of that goes away.
My artwork's not for everyone. I could give two shits if people hate my work. I knew that too. I've always known that. So when I knew a bunch of surfers were becoming offended by it, I was like, oh, this is interesting, you know, and this is only gonna make the work stronger. So bring it on, like keep this conversation going until people feel uncomfortable to actually reach out and say bigotry and harsh words towards anyone who's different from them.